She always walked alone after her shifts, until that snowy evening, when a shadow followed her from across the street. It wasn't human. And it was carrying something. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The wind whipped down the streets of Ashford, Vermont, rattling loose windowpanes and bending the bare branches of maple trees. It was mid-January, and the small town lay under a heavy silence broken only by the distant creak of porch swings and the soft crunch of snow beneath passing paws. The train station on the edge of town had long been abandoned, its paint peeling, platform half buried under frozen drifts. No trains came anymore. No passengers waited. Only the wind, and tonight, something else. A golden figure moved slowly through the alley behind the depot. Harley was a 7-year-old golden retriever, once strong and full of light. His fur, once a brilliant sunlit gold, was now dulled by time and streaked with gray around his muzzle and ears. His eyes were dark, steady, and carried the weight of understanding. Harley had spent most of his life comforting others, first as a therapy dog at Ashford Haven, the town's aging nursing home, where he padded softly through hallways bringing peace to the lonely and afraid. But when his owner, Mr. Robert Cleary, passed away the year before, Harley's world had unraveled. He had been taken to a shelter briefly but escaped soon after, returning to the only thing he remembered, wandering the quiet corners of Ashford alone, his head low, his tail no longer held high. That night, as the temperature plunged and snow crunched beneath his paws, Harley followed a familiar path past the shuttered florist shop, the empty parking lot, and the long quiet station. The moon hung low above the rooftops, casting a pale light across the cracked pavement. Then, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or owl or late-night tires skidding on ice. It was small, sharp, and so heartbreakingly human, a cry. High-pitched. Frantic. Weak. Harley stopped mid-step, head raised. The sound came again. He turned, ears swiveling, and moved toward the line of trash bins near the station wall, where the shadows were deep and untouched. The cry grew louder as he approached the final bin. Sniffing, he caught the scent of something strange, metal, sour milk, cold flesh. Carefully, Harley stood on his hind legs, paws braced against the edge of the bin. What he saw made his heart race. A newborn baby, no more than a few days old, lay curled among torn paper sacks and discarded food containers. It was wrapped in a hospital-style blanket, thin and damp, its skin tinged blue from the cold. Its fists trembled in the air, its mouth open in a silent scream, too weak now to cry louder. For a moment, Harley froze. Then, driven by a force older than memory, he moved. He reached down and gently gripped the edge of the blanket with his teeth. The baby stirred slightly as Harley pulled it free, careful not to jostle too hard. He took the infant into his mouth, softly, as he had once carried stuffed bears to the nursing home residents, and stepped back from the bin. The night air bit into his paws as he turned from the trash and walked into the snow. Across town, in a quiet house on Hillcrest Lane, a woman sat alone in her dim kitchen. Evelyn Carter, 62, was a retired nurse with a face worn not by years but by sorrow. She was tall and slightly hunched, with silver hair pulled back into a simple knot. Her hands, still strong, still precise, curled around a ceramic mug, though the tea inside had long gone cold. Once, Evelyn had been the kind of woman who filled rooms with her presence, cheerful, efficient, a natural caregiver. But everything had changed 3 winters ago. Her daughter, Sarah, had been her world. A bright, compassionate young woman, Sarah had been studying pediatric medicine in Boston when she died suddenly in a car crash. Since then, Evelyn had closed off parts of herself she never reopened. She retired early. Stopped taking calls. She no longer decorated the house, no longer baked for neighbors, no longer played piano in the church choir. Now, her world was quiet. Too quiet. Outside her window, the snow fell steadily. Inside, Evelyn pressed her hands to her eyes, not to cry, she no longer did, but to fill the time. Snow drifted quietly through the streets of Ashford, Vermont, falling in lazy spirals beneath the glow of aging street lamps. It was nearly midnight, and the world had gone still. No passing cars. No barking dogs. Just the crunch of frozen earth beneath soft paws, and the low whimper of a baby nestled against warm golden fur. Harley moved steadily through the snow, a shape of gold and shadow. His breath puffed in short clouds as he padded up Sycamore Street, the infant wrapped tightly in a tattered hospital blanket, cradled gently in his mouth. His gait was slow but sure, driven not by destination, but by memory. He stopped before a small yellow house near the end of the block. A single porch light glowed faintly, barely cutting through the snow-filled air. It was a home he remembered, a place once filled with gentle hands and warm voices. Harley climbed the steps, his paws slipping slightly on the icy boards, and placed the bundle gently on the welcome mat. Then, with the urgency of instinct, he barked. Once. Twice. A third time, louder. Inside, Evelyn Carter stirred. She sat curled in an old armchair, an afghan draped across her lap, a cup of untouched chamomile tea cooling beside her. A book lay open in her lap, but she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the radiator. The barking broke the silence. Evelyn rose slowly, frowning. She wrapped the afghan around her shoulders and moved toward the front door, unsure whether the sound had come from dream or memory. She opened it a crack, and froze. Harley. Her voice was barely audible. He stood there, dusted with snow, his eyes calm and steady. At his feet, a bundle. Evelyn's heart seized as she dropped to her knees. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the blanket. A baby, barely born. Tiny hands curled tight, lips tinged blue, skin cold to the touch. Oh Lord! Evelyn scooped the child into her arms and turned instinctively back into the house. The Afghan dropped to the porch unnoticed as she crossed the threshold, clutching the infant to her chest. Her years of training as a nurse surfaced without hesitation. She adjusted the thermostat, turned on the space heater, grabbed a towel, and warmed it in the microwave. Her hands moved fast, efficient, but her heart raced like it hadn't in years. Harley stepped inside behind her, snow melting into the rug beneath his paws. The baby let out a faint cry as Evelyn pressed him gently against her shoulder. She wrapped the warm towel around the infant's fragile limbs and sat down, cradling him with one arm while reaching for her phone with the other. She called emergency services, voice low but composed. As she relayed the details, her eyes never left the child's face. When she ended the call, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of quiet, thick, alive, filled with breath and memory. She looked at Harley, who now sat close by, his gaze fixed on the baby. You remembered, she whispered, voice catching. You remembered this place. Evelyn leaned back slowly, letting the baby rest against her collarbone. A familiar weight. A long-lost rhythm. Then it happened. As the heat of the room began to chase the cold from the child's skin, Evelyn felt something open inside her, something she had shut tightly 3 winters ago. Sarah. Her name passed through Evelyn's mind like a breath of wind, sudden and uninvited. She remembered the way Sarah had looked when she was just a few hours old, her round cheeks, the way her eyes had searched the world with more courage than her small body should have allowed. Evelyn had held her the same way once, in a hospital room bathed in fluorescent light, whispering promises she never imagined would one day be broken by fate. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Evelyn hadn't cried in years. Not really. She had built walls, thick and silent, around her memories. She had folded Sarah's clothes and placed them in boxes. Packed away the laughter and shut the doors on old rooms. But holding this baby, this tiny, abandoned life, cracked something loose. She stroked the baby's brow. "You don't even have a name," she murmured. The baby stirred, a faint flicker of life returning to fragile limbs. And still Harley watched, unmoving, as if guarding something sacred. Evelyn looked at him, eyes glistening. "You brought him here. Why me?" She didn't expect an answer. Yet somehow, deep in her chest, she understood. Harley hadn't just found a baby. He had found her, pulled her back from the quiet edge she had wandered so long. He had brought this child not just to warmth, but to a woman who once knew how to love, how to mend, how to hold life steady when it was slipping. The fire in the hearth remained unlit, but Evelyn felt its echo return. The flicker of purpose. The beginning of something she thought was forever gone. She rocked slowly, heart sinking to the gentle breath of the child in her arms. And for the first time in 3 years, she whispered a prayer, not for the dead, but for the living. The sky above Ashford was a flat sheet of gray when Evelyn stepped outside the pediatric unit to stretch her legs. Her body ached from sitting too long, but she refused to go far. Inside, the baby, Noah, as they were calling him now, lay in a softly humming incubator, his skin no longer ghostly pale, though his breathing remained shallow. Oxygen tubes framed his small face like delicate wires, and the warmth of the neonatal unit couldn't quite reach the chill Evelyn carried in her chest. She crossed her arms, holding herself tightly against the draft that slipped through the hallway seams. The doctor on shift had confirmed what Evelyn already feared: Noah had clear signs of neglect. His blood sugar had been dangerously low, his body weight well beneath average for a newborn, and his oxygen saturation had dropped upon arrival. Hypothermia. Early malnutrition. Abandonment. The terms were clinical, detached. But Evelyn had felt it in her bones the moment she touched him, the frailty, the silence between each breath. Harley lay curled by the chair in the corner, his ears flicking now and then at every passing nurse's footsteps. He hadn't left the child's side since they arrived. The nurses adored him. Evelyn noticed that some of them whispered, "the miracle dog," when they passed. But Harley didn't care about the attention. His eyes were always locked on Noah, his body alert in quiet readiness. The news had broken that morning. Evelyn hadn't given permission for her photo to be shared, but someone had taken one regardless, Harley on the hospital steps, Evelyn clutching the infant. Now the story was everywhere. And perhaps that was why they showed up. It was just after noon when 2 strangers entered the pediatric wing. Evelyn turned as the doors opened and caught sight of them immediately. The woman was thin, sharply dressed in a beige wool coat and matching heels, her dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears. The man beside her was taller, heavier, his coat unzipped to reveal a crimson sweater, and he wore a look of tight-lipped concern that seemed rehearsed. They introduced themselves to the attending nurse as Caroline and David Bennett. Evelyn stood quietly, watching from near the window as they explained they had seen the news report and believed the child might be their missing son. Her stomach dropped. The moment the couple stepped into the neonatal room and laid eyes on Noah, Evelyn felt it. Something didn't align. Their gazes weren't filled with recognition or relief, they flicked too quickly, moved too carefully, like actors on a stage unsure of their lines. Harley, still lying by the incubator, stiffened. His ears perked. His breathing grew slower, deeper. Then came the softest growl, a warning Evelyn knew well. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping between the couple and the crib. "Can you tell me exactly how you lost your child?" Caroline's voice cracked with feigned emotion. "We were in the park. I set him down just for a moment while I reached for my phone. Then someone must have taken him. It's been a nightmare." David nodded solemnly. "We didn't know what to do. We thought he was gone." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Did you file a report with the police?" The couple hesitated. We weren't sure it would help," David said. "But we saw the news this morning and rushed here." Before Evelyn could say more, a knock came at the outer glass door. Standing there was a man she hadn't seen in years, Daniel Briggs, now chief of police in Ashford. He looked older, broader, wrapped in a dark pea coat and scarf, snow still melting on his shoulders. His salt and pepper beard had grown in, lending him a weathered but thoughtful air. Their eyes met, and something like warmth passed between them, though neither said anything at first. "Miss Carter," Daniel said after a beat. "I heard you were the one who brought the boy in." "I wasn't," Evelyn replied. She nodded to the dog by the crib. "He was." Daniel followed her gaze, taking in the sight of Harley watching the couple like a soldier at his post. Caroline stepped forward quickly. "We're the child's parents. We just want to take him home." Daniel raised a hand gently. "I understand. I just need to ask a few questions." His voice was steady, measured, the voice of a man used to sifting truth from noise. He spoke with the couple for several minutes while Evelyn listened in silence, standing beside Harley, her hand resting on his back. She watched Daniel's eyes as he worked, still sharp, still quiet, still searching for the details people didn't mean to give away. Eventually, Daniel turned back to Evelyn. "I'll need to look into a few things. Birth records, hospital logs, any missing persons reports that match. It'll take time." "I understand," she said, though her jaw was tight. He glanced toward the crib, then back at her. "For now, no one's making any decisions." Evelyn nodded, grateful. Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "You look good," he said, quietly. "You lie well," Evelyn replied, a faint smile at the corner of her lips. "I was your student, after all." Then he left, walking out into the flurry of reporters that now crowded the hospital's parking lot. The couple stayed in the hallway, murmuring between themselves. Inside the room, Evelyn sat beside the crib again. Harley moved closer, resting his head near Noah's feet. Nothing had been resolved. No truths laid bare. But something was shifting. And Evelyn, who had once lost everything, now found herself willing to fight again, not just for the baby sleeping before her, but for the part of her that Harley had brought back from the cold. The following morning in Ashford brought a pale, icy sun, stretching faint fingers of light through the frost-lined windows of North Hill Regional Hospital. Inside the NICU, the warmth was artificial but deeply comforting, soft beeps from monitors, the quiet swish of nurses' shoes, and the persistent rhythm of hope fighting through the machines. Evelyn Carter stood over Noah's incubator, her hands cradling a folded blanket as she watched his tiny chest rise and fall. He looked better today, still so small, so impossibly fragile, but no longer drowning in cold and silence. Her eyes flicked toward the baby's chart, then toward the row of monitors. She had done this 1,000 times in her former life, yet this time it felt entirely new. More personal. More necessary. Harley lay stretched out beneath the incubator, head on his paws, but alert. His golden coat gleamed faintly in the overhead lights, though snow still clung to the tips of his ears from their early morning walk to the courtyard. Since Noah had arrived, Harley had hardly left his side, only stepping away when Evelyn gently insisted. That morning, something had shifted in her. After checking Noah's vitals alongside one of the nurses, Evelyn had lingered in the break room longer than usual. She stood before the staff bulletin board, staring at the sign that read, "Part-time NICU night nurse needed, immediate start." She hadn't taken it down. Not yet. But something inside her had stirred, something Harley had carried to her doorstep. Meanwhile, across the hospital in a quiet conference room, Daniel Briggs sat facing the couple who still claimed to be Noah's parents. The room was sparsely furnished, a metal table, 4 chairs, a pitcher of water, but Daniel liked it that way. Less comfort made for quicker truth. He had removed his coat but kept the scarf tucked neatly into the collar of his shirt. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, dark and deliberate, missed nothing. Claire and David Bennett were seated across from him. David slouched slightly, arms crossed. Claire sat upright, clutching her purse on her lap like a fragile relic. "So," Daniel began, voice calm, "let's go over it again. You were in Ashford Park 2 nights ago. Yes, David said quickly. She fainted. It was cold. When she came to, the baby was gone. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what you said yesterday. Except yesterday, you said you were in Briar Creek. Claire blinked. I thought, he meant, we had driven through Briar Creek first. Daniel leaned forward just slightly. And the child's name? Joshua, Claire answered again, this time with hesitation. Daniel flipped through his notes. You said he was born at St. Mary's. I contacted St. Mary's. No record. No birth certificate. No prenatal visits. Claire's fingers curled tighter around her purse strap. David's eyes flicked toward her, then toward the door. And in that moment, Harley, who had been brought in by a nurse to rest under Evelyn's chair during the process, lifted his head sharply. His eyes locked on David. Then, slowly, his lips pulled back, exposing the tips of his teeth. A low growl rumbled from his chest. David flinched back in his seat. What the hell's wrong with that dog? Daniel didn't move. He seems to remember you. Claire stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. He's just a dog. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A dog who led us to a baby in a blizzard. A dog who hasn't barked once since coming in, until now. The room thickened with silence. Then Claire cracked. Okay, she said, her voice trembling. Okay. He's not ours. We never said he was. David spun toward her. Claire. She snapped. Don't look at me like that. This whole thing was your idea. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply sat back and let the unraveling begin. Claire's voice rose in pitch. We saw the news story. Everyone was talking about a reward being set up, a foundation, donations. We thought if we claimed him, if we looked convincing enough. David buried his face in his hands. We didn't think we'd get caught. Daniel stood, folding his notebook. You will be charged with obstruction and filing a false report. But more than that, you came here thinking no one would notice. That no one would care. He turned toward the nurse by the door. Escort them to security. Hold until local authorities arrive. As the couple were led out, Daniel paused just a moment, then reached down and gently patted Harley's head. Good instincts, old boy. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing outside the NICU again. She had just finished feeding Noah, assisted by one of the newer nurses, Emily Sparks, a young woman with chestnut-colored hair pulled into a bouncy ponytail. Emily was friendly, bright-eyed, and still relatively new to the hospital, known for her energy and optimism. You've still got it, Miss Carter, Emily said, smiling. You work with the monitors like you never left. Evelyn smiled faintly. It's been a while. Emily tilted her head. Have you ever considered coming back? I mean, we could use someone like you. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked through the glass at Noah, then down at Harley, who was lying beside her again, tail gently sweeping across the tile. She thought of the bulletin board. Of the soft hum of the ward. Of a part of her that hadn't felt useful in years. Maybe, she said quietly. Maybe I have. That evening, she spoke with the hospital's administrator, a thin, bespectacled man named Leon Grant, who had once been her junior nurse many years ago. Leon remembered her well, his face lighting up when she entered his office, a stack of old personnel files at his elbow. We'd be honored to have you back, even part-time, he said sincerely. As for Harley. Evelyn looked toward the golden retriever seated patiently by the door. Leon smiled. We've had therapy dogs before. But never one who saved a life. He pulled out a form. If you'd be willing, I can start the paperwork to get him certified again. Evelyn looked down at Harley, who looked back with steady, trusting eyes. Yes, she said softly. Let's do that. The first signs of spring arrived quietly in Ashford, softened snowdrifts along curbs, a whisper of green under bare branches, and the return of birdsong at dawn. Outside North Hill Regional Hospital, crocuses had begun to poke through the half-thawed soil, delicate and determined. The town was slowly emerging from winter, and inside the neonatal unit, Evelyn Carter felt a similar thaw happening inside herself. Noah's recovery had progressed faster than any of the staff expected. Though still delicate and under close watch, the infant had begun to stir with more energy, his small limbs stretching with faint cries, his lips pink and warm. He was no longer just surviving, he was responding. Living. Evelyn had just finished changing Noah's swaddle when a quiet knock came at the NICU entrance. She looked up, expecting one of the nurses. But it wasn't. A young girl stood outside the glass door, flanked by a hospital counselor and one of the social workers. She looked barely older than a high schooler, her body narrow and folded into itself like a page half-turned. Her jeans were too big, her hoodie frayed at the cuffs. Long brown hair hung in uneven waves, hiding most of her face. Her fingers wrung the hem of her sleeve as though it was the only thing keeping her anchored. Emily Matthews, 17, eyes downcast and shoulders shaking. The hospital counselor, Marcia Elwood, a plump, kind-eyed woman in her 50s, stepped inside and nodded softly to Evelyn. "This is the girl," she said gently. "She came forward last night." Evelyn glanced back toward Noah, then stepped into the hallway. "She was the one?" she asked, her voice low. Marcia nodded. "Gave birth at home. Alone. Hid the pregnancy out of fear. Left him in the park, then panicked. She's been living in a shelter 3 towns over." Evelyn looked at the girl, who had yet to raise her head. "Does she want to see him?" "She's terrified," Marcia replied. "But yes." Evelyn crossed the space slowly and crouched beside the girl. "Emily," she said gently. The girl nodded, but didn't look up. Evelyn waited. Then added, "He's strong. More than we expected. Just like you." Emily's eyes flicked upward, hazel, glassy with unshed tears. "Is he, okay?" "He's better every day." The girl's knees buckled slightly. Evelyn reached out instinctively, one hand bracing her back. For a moment, they just stood there, woman and girl, fear and forgiveness woven silently between them. "I never meant to hurt him," Emily whispered. I didn't know what else to do." "You did what you could," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "But now you have another chance. Would you like to take it?" Emily's breath caught. Then she nodded, once, hard. A few minutes later, in the quiet of the NICU, the reunion took place. Evelyn stood close as Emily crossed the room slowly, almost reverently. Harley sat beside Noah's crib, unmoving, eyes tracking the girl with a strange knowing. As Emily approached, he gave a soft, almost imperceptible whine. She froze. "This is him?" she asked, barely audible. Evelyn nodded. "He was the one who found your son. Carried him to safety." Emily stepped closer and peered into the crib. When she saw the baby's face, his tiny nose, the way his fingers curled just like hers, something inside her broke open. She crumpled forward, one hand bracing the crib's edge as her body shook with quiet sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again and again. Evelyn placed a firm, warm hand on her shoulder and said nothing. That moment, witnessed only by Harley and a passing nurse who paused by the door, was enough to still the entire unit. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was sacred. The next day, with social services involved and a counselor assigned, Emily agreed to keep her baby. A plan was drafted, a community housing program for young mothers, nutritional support, parenting classes. Her parents, once rigid and unsupportive, had softened under the truth and the sight of their grandson, and had begun to reconnect with her. For Evelyn, it was the closing of a circle. Or the opening of one. She stood in the courtyard that same evening, signing the final paperwork that officially made Harley hers. The hospital staff had voted unanimously to bring him back into the therapy dog program. But to Evelyn, that was secondary. What mattered was that he had chosen her again. 2 weeks later, under a sky of soft gray and shy sun, Evelyn walked through Ashford Community Park. Spring was blooming gently, daffodils lining the pathway, children's laughter ringing from the newly reopened playground. Evelyn settled onto a wooden bench near the pond. Beside her, Emily sat with Noah wrapped in a light green blanket in her arms. The girl looked healthier now, fuller in the face, her hair brushed and tied. There was still hesitation in her posture, but also pride. Noah cooed softly, his small hand gripping the edge of her sleeve. Harley lay at their feet, tail flicking gently, eyes half closed in the warmth of the afternoon. They sat in peaceful silence until a familiar voice called out from the path. "Well, this looks like trouble." Evelyn turned to see Daniel Briggs, casual in jeans and a blue flannel shirt, a coffee cup in hand and a rare smile on his lips. He looked younger out of uniform, lighter somehow. "Only the good kind," Evelyn replied, nodding toward the baby. Daniel approached and knelt beside Harley, scratching gently behind his ear. "So," he said, looking up at Evelyn. "Back in the hospital. Back with a dog. And back giving orders, I hear." She raised an eyebrow. "You hear too much." He chuckled. "That's my job." For a few moments, they simply sat there, an old nurse, a new mother, a baby saved by fur and fate, a dog who never gave up, and a police chief who had watched them all come back to life in the smallest of ways. Life didn't always return the way it left. It came back softer. Quieter. But no less miraculous. As a breeze stirred the daffodils and Harley nuzzled Noah's foot, Evelyn closed her eyes, not in sorrow, but in peace. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or trumpets. Sometimes, they come on quiet paws in the middle of the night, wrapped in a blanket and carried by a heart that still remembers how to love. In this story, Harley wasn't just a dog, he was a messenger of hope. And through his loyalty, a forgotten child found a future, a broken woman found purpose again, and a young girl found the courage to begin anew. In our daily lives, we often miss the quiet miracles, the small kindness, the unexpected reunion, the healing that begins in silence. But God works not only through angels in the sky, but through fur-covered friends, second chances, and hearts that still believe. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and write amen to bless others who need hope today. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that restoration is possible. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us we are never too lost for God to find us. May the Lord watch over you and the ones you love. May you find healing in the places you thought were too far gone. And may you always remember, a new beginning might be just one faithful step away.